Good evening. This is the joint meeting of the Finance Committee and the Select Board. I'll speak to the matter of the Finance Committee first. We are a committee of 7. There are 3 in attendance. We are, by the way, at the Public Safety Complex at 576 Pleasant Street, here obviously in Paxton. Our committee membership is made up of 7. There are 3 physically present in the training room at the Public Safety Complex, and there are 3 joining us online. 1 is away traveling out of the country, actually. So 4 is a quorum. We have 6 present. I declare we're open for business.
Great. So I will go ahead and open the Select Board meeting for tonight. It is currently 7:06 p.m. We are meeting here in the Public Safety Complex in the training room. Carol and I are here present in the room, and Kirk is online.
So we're here this evening, maybe for an hour, maybe for 2 hours, to summarize $18 million in 10 weeks of meetings to decide where we go next. The Finance Committee has concluded its review of all 41 cost centers last week, approving each one individually, including the Wachusett Regional School District and Bay Path Folk School, plus all the other town-related cost centers or departments. We've also voted to approve the revenue has been submitted by essentially the town administrator with all various inputs to her, much of which is external, some of which is town-related and internal, but that was voted on and approved last Wednesday as well. And with that, we ended up with a budget deficit of $1,131,568, and that's when we adjourned to try to determine what is done with regards to that, how the school plays into it, whether or not there are revisits of any departments for reconsideration for cuts, whether or not there's an override, none of which was decided at the point of adjournment at our last meeting, and that's where we're here this evening to work with the Select Board to have a further discussion as to where and what would be the next step. So, that concludes my opening remarks, and
I do have one question, just
Yeah.
Heather, point of reference, the FY26 budget summary sheet has a different deficit number than the deficit on the budget deficit analysis. So I've got 1,131,568 on one and 1,129,968 on the other.
Yes, it's a difference of $1,600.
right.
I cannot tell you why. I spent about an hour trying to find out. So remember when we do the deficit change sheet, we're starting with some assumptions. We move the numbers as they go. So it's possible something wasn't captured early on. It was printed right afterwards. But the 1,129,968 is the actual number.
Okay.
So good news is it's lower than what we thought on the calculated sheet. And the only other difference with that number as well, or even with those tracking deficit sheets, is the one thing we didn't account for. So I don't know if FinCom wants to vote or they want to wait until we do articles. But we usually do $1,100 in an article for the greenways, and that usually comes out of the operating budget.
Thank you.
So Heather, is there a value of putting, notwithstanding the $1,600 variance, which I only learned of at 10 minutes to 7 and decided not to cancel the meeting, is it possible to put the budget deficit analysis sheet that the Finance Committee has worked with? I think it might give us a starting point. So you can see from that the start, when we began our deliberations, was in the middle of the page, was a budget deficit of $1,174,451. And we ended up, as Heather just mentioned, notwithstanding the number at the bottom of the page, but $1,600 different, $1,129,968. And we showed it this way to see and to show what the budget deficit for our starting position was made up of, which was the original submissions of the budgets by the 41 departments and cost centers. Then they're in compliance with a guidance letter that was sent out to them. In that same guidance letter that was sent out to them, they were given the option to submit additional requests, whereupon they felt they couldn't live within the 2.5% compliance. And that totaled another 702,071,000. And then we gave a breakdown as to what made that up, and the DPW was in for 114, police for 90, fire and EMS for 49,500. There were 9 other departments in at 35,000. The school was, quote, out of compliance, that being in excess of 2.5%. So to give a little more definition to what those, or what that starting deficit was, we broke it out essentially between town and school. And then we deliberated for X amount of meetings, and we added some and got updated information of others, made decisions on still others, and that's how we landed at the $1,129,000. And don't mean to make light of it, but once again, that's where we adjourned. We didn't make any recommendations. We didn't have any further considerations. We deferred until this meeting right now. So I would essentially kind of defer to the select board and ask for their Q&A or their interpretation or their thoughts as to what next steps would be.
So I know Heather has some recommendations around where to go from here. And so is it all right if we give Heather the floor to discuss her recommendations?
Yeah.
Thanks, Julia. So we have to figure out where to go from here and how and at what extent that involves an override. So a couple pieces to consider, right? Number one, I figure with the override, the first question is, do you do one override question or 2 override questions? Back last year when we had the debate at the same time and there was a conversation between Finance Committee and Select Board, the discussion came up of if we were going to include the school, first of all, how would we figure out what that number was to even include in it? Back in October at the joint working session of the Select Board and the Finance Committee, there was actually a determination that was made before budget season started. A letter was sent to the from the Finance Committee, Select Board, and myself to the school committee and the superintendent, advising that the position we were taking is that if the assessment, aside from the debt calculation, exceeded 2.5% for our assessment, anything that was over that 2.5% would be pushed forward to some sort of override. We have that calculation. Mark mentioned a little bit earlier. It's on the calculation sheet. It's $411,791. So we know that exact number. That is something we weren't easily able to calculate last year. We didn't have a pre-plan of where we were going when we were looking at that piece. But that's something we resolved this year in October, is trying to think ahead as to one of the issues that came up last year. So that's the first part. That we actually do know, when you look at that full deficit number of 1.129968, you know that the town side of it is $718,177. Once you take out the school side of $411,791, that number accounts for the amount over the 2.5% increase of the assessment. So that's the first part, is how would we even calculate that number? We know, we have it, it's there. The second piece comes down to whether you do one override question or two override questions. Well, there's always a concern, right? If you do both of them, two override questions, there's a concern that you're gonna split people when they go to the ballot and they're gonna choose one or the other and not necessarily both, and potentially have the two pieces competing against each other. The other option is, even if one of the two passes, essentially, regardless, it's still a cut for the town, right? If the town side passed and not the school, but at the end of the day, the school still doesn't reduce the assessment much lower than that additional $411,000, the town is still gonna be obligated to work with our current budget and make reductions to that amount or something close to it. If the school side passes and the town doesn't, then you still have to go back and make reductions on the town side services by about $718,000. And if both end up failing, then you have to make reductions to the whole number. So that's the second piece. So the first piece is, how much of this deficit is accounted for from the school side, how much from the town? The second piece is, do you do one ballot question, do you do two? And then the third piece, and this is something I've talked about a little bit more recently, is looking at what we did last year and how do we learn from it moving forward? Not only with the ability to get the information out, but also how do we handle a lot of the concerns that came up last year, right? Doing the multiple overrides, the multiple town meetings was extremely stressful, not just for the residents, but for the employees, for the department heads, for everyone involved to have to keep going back and look at things again and again. Instead of trying to do that, one of the thoughts might be, think about changing the order. So we do town meeting usually, then we do the election the week after. If we changed the order and just did the election first, it would give us a definitive answer on whether the override passed, right? We know how much money we're working with. You then would set the date for town meeting a few weeks after that. If it passes, you can probably do it quicker because you don't have to reconvene and look at things all over again. If it doesn't pass, you take a little bit longer and you figure out what those numbers are, those calculations and changes, you move forward. That gives the employees and the department heads and even the residents a reduced set of stress, right? Because even though it doesn't remove all of the stress from the process, it means you only have to do both steps once. Last year, you had multiple overrides, you had multiple town meetings. This year, you could do one of each. You could do the override first, see what the answer is, and then go to the town meeting based on that answer and talk to folks about that and where you're gonna go. One of the downsides with doing that, I guess two at least downsides that become very apparent and the team identified today, the first being people are used to doing town meeting before the election. The second piece is that folks often like to get information at town meeting to be informed before they go to the election. The second piece is an easier one to address. We can still have information, an informational session. We can still do some kind of thing on the date we originally scheduled town meeting to provide additional information if people like it. And some kind of public forum for people to hear about, but it would give the opportunity to the town both, it would reduce our cost, right? Because you're not paying for multiple elections, multiple town meetings. It would reduce the extra stress of having to go back multiple times. And it would be a clearer message to the residents saying, okay, we're gonna do one override and then one town meeting based on the results of the override. So that people understand exactly where everything stands and what the next steps are, and it's clear and there's no question. So to summarize from the beginning here, so deficit, 1,129,968. Deficit split of that, the town is 718,177. The school's contribution is 411,791. Question to deal with is one override question or two. My recommendation on that's one. And then the next piece to deal with is, do we keep things the way they are scheduled, May 5th for town meeting, May 12th for the election, or do we pause and do May 12th for the election and then schedule the town meeting based on the results of the election, giving us a little bit more time and also giving us some time to see how other towns handle things with the school and so forth.
So Heather, as point of clarification, not for purposes of opining on this, the annual town meeting scheduled for May 5th. The annual town election is a week later, May 12th. So what would you suggest moving the annual town meeting to, the 19th?
I would suggest waiting to set a date on the annual town meeting until we get through the election. Do the election, then the next day, the select board, which will at that point have 5 people seated in those positions, would be able to meet, potentially even meet jointly with the select board or FinCom and figure out what to do next, right? If an override passes, it's pretty easy, pretty much everything for the warrant's ready to go, nothing would really change. If an override doesn't pass, then it gives everyone an opportunity to work on, okay, what's next for the budget? Because our budget does not work if we don't have funds to fund the budget. We're gonna have to look at things differently and figure out the next plan. But this would avoid putting additional stress in an already very stressful situation on employees, department heads, and even residents who have to keep scheduling all of these events to attend.
If I can add to the information for timing, the last Wachusett town to vote on their budget to have their town meeting is Holden, which will be on May 19th. The next Monday after that, of course, is Memorial Day. The next Monday after that would be June 2nd.
I should, but I don't have any comment as to the merits or disagreeing with it or agreeing with it. It is unconventional. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it is different. And in that regard,
I
I don't
guess-
know how
oh,
accepting
sorry,
it will
Mark.
be. Excuse me?
I was gonna say, I think it's a good idea from lessons learned and the difficult position we're in. I would be in favor of that.
I actually agree with, I think that was Ben, right?
Yes.
I actually kind of, yeah, I like this idea. And it doesn't, I think the whole information, people getting information, I agree that people like to get information at the town meeting, but when I really think about the information you get at the town meeting these days, in a situation like this, it's out there. If, and people can, I don't think there's going to be a big discrepancy. It does feel weird because it's unconventional, but I actually, with the timing of the other town meetings and where the school budget is, I like this idea.
So does this need to be a vote, or does the select board decide this?
I think it's outside of our purview, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth, and we're here to do the budget, and decide when we're gonna have the town meeting.
Right.
As far as FinCom goes. I mean, we can opine, but I don't think we can vote.
It's a vote of the select board, but I don't think it's a vote that should be made without input. So I appreciate the input from finance in terms of the whole process. I think that, we need to work through this together, and I'm hopeful that, any vote that we made on that front, I would want to be supported by finance.
Well, there's 6 members present. 2 have expressed favor to it. I'm not trying to beg the question, but I would go either way. I would defer to the select board. Whatever they want to do, I certainly wouldn't object.
I do think there's benefit to having an understanding because of the situation that we're in with the school. The way our regional agreement works, for anybody who's watching who doesn't understand it, is there's 5 towns in the Wachusett region. In order for the school budget to pass, 4 towns need to agree on it, which means in order for the school budget to not pass, 2 towns would have to turn it down. Understanding that our town meeting is typically first of the 5 town meetings at the same time as Sterling. If we were to move the town meeting, we would have a much better understanding of where the other towns sit, and it would help to inform our decision-making when it comes to our town meeting and our appraisal of the school budget.
Hey, Mark, it's Jeff, if I may. I also could go either way, but I think this has some merit. What we know is last year didn't work. That strategy, no one's fault, but it just was difficult. So, I'm certainly open to creative options to make this process smoother for everyone. So I have no issue with that, and I give some credit to the creative thinking here. Thanks.
So to Jeremy's point, absent a vote, I think you got the sense that the Finance Committee favors it.
Okay, great. So is there any discussion on Select Board with regard to moving the town meeting to, I'll throw a date out of June 2nd, because that would allow all of the other towns to have had their town meetings?
I'll certainly go along with that.
I like the idea because lessons learned, some votes could have gone differently had we done this last year.
Great. So on to that end, then, I would entertain a motion on the Select Board side to go ahead and move town meeting to June 2nd.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There is a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, Kirk?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. Now, we do
So-
need to confirm, I think, with Lori, that that's going to work on her end, Lori and Roger, but at least we have a date to work with.
Awesome.
So Heather, to respond to the other question out there in terms of our letter in 1 or 2, I guess I would ask, has everybody got the guidance newsletter or memo that Wachusett Regional sent out?
Yes,
Which
so
I'm struck by the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph, which speaks to the point of clear language, and having read it 4 times, I'm totally unclear. So can you help us out as to what this is saying? Because I'm confused in terms of an override versus it being a warrant article versus who actually votes on it. It's not as clear as I think they lay claim to.
So we can always check with legal on this, but my understanding of this is it pertains to the town meeting and not to the ballot box or the ballot question. So it sounds like they're talking about the appropriation that's put forward in articles. So everyone has this in your packet, those online. You should have got an email from me probably right around 7 o'clock with this packet as well. So this is the very last document in the packet. So it does refer to town meeting. I don't think there's anything in here about the ballot question. And my interpretation of reading this, and again, I would defer and, we'd reach out to legal if there's questions on it, is they're stating that essentially it sounds like when you put the article forward, the article itself is supposed to say the full amount as certified by the school district of what the assessment is. It doesn't say anything about that's the amount that has to be voted, right? I'm not seeing anything in here that says you can't restrict your motion and say, okay, you've asked for $5, our motion is for $2. It does seem to say that if the ultimate opinion of the town meeting body is any number other than the number that's approved, it sounds like it equates to a no. And then it says if you give another number in your suggestion in your motion that, let's say they ask for $5 and you only give $2, then the school district should consider that as a possibility. It doesn't mean they're going to, but even if they do, and the number they ultimately approve is higher than the number you voted, you're going back.
So to expand on that based on the letter that we sent 12 November of 2024, saying that we would put anything over 2.5% on a separate warrant article.
No.
I think we didn't say warrant article. I
On a
think
separate, I'm
override.
sorry.
On
We
the
said it's going to
override.
the
I'm
override.
going to an override.
So your funding source is
Still
going to
can
be
do that.
contingent upon an override.
Okay.
This doesn't seem to restrict any of those pieces. This
Fair enough.
just has to do with the article at town meeting
Okay,
itself.
yep.
This is exactly how we've always dealt with
Right.
it and understood it, so.
We've done this before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this, again, clear language not present in this document. It's a lot of words.
So they also talk about, meeting minimum net school spending, and we don't have a problem with that.
Right.
Our discretionary is very high.
So all this is saying is that you've got to put it to town meeting as it was submitted and as it was adopted by the school committee.
Yes.
Correct.
Fair enough. Thank you. And that number was what? I know we have the deficit here. What was the total number?
Just give me a minute, Jeremy. I have to,
Hold on. I got it
okay.
here.
I think it's also on the town's website. I'd probably put it there, so I'll go look for it.
No, you should have it on this somewhere.
It's not, I don't think it's in that packet. I did the full out of the school budget number last time.
Oh,
8,358,879.
yes. 358, 879.
Okay. So now let's circle back to one of the earlier points, one override or two.
So we know historically that when towns go for an override like this, it's generally driven by the people at the school. So it's the parents and those who are voting to try to get the school budget taken care of that end up pushing the override through. I think if we were to divide it out into two overrides, we just run the risk of dividing votes, and then both of them either fail or one passes and one fails, and that ends up becoming, in any instance, it's a cut to the town, because we are at the mercy of a regional school district that will assess us no matter what. So my suggestion would be for there to be a single override number. That said, I think that there needs to be education that, especially with the ballot coming first, that number that gets voted at the ballot it just creates the window in the tax levy. It doesn't mean we're spending that. The amount that gets spent is the amount that's voted at town meeting.
So to be clear, the warrant articles are the select boards.
Correct.
And not ours. What happens after they're written, they come back to the finance committee to vote on all of them. Even some that are not finance related, but the bylaws say we vote on all of them.
Yeah.
So the letter that we did send to Wachusett Regional School Superintendent, School Committee, subcommittees and the like, let me read the point that addresses kind of where we are. Should the Wachusett Regional School assessment exceed 2.5% increase, we will present any amount over that limit as a separate warrant article, requiring a vote contingent upon the proposition override to secure funding for that override. So that speaks to me that our letter went on record as this being separate and apart. So there would be two overrides upon my reading of the letter that we sent to them.
I understand where you're coming from. It does say separate warrant article. So, and we would typically vote the school as either a separate warrant article or at the very least a separate motion at town meeting. The override is separate and distinct from that. And so the way that it's worded on the warrant doesn't necessarily translate to the way it is on a ballot question. It's not required to be one-to-one.
Yep, so let me make it simple though, is that if you want to combine to one override amount, this letter that we sent and we signed after multiple drafts is on record as saying separate. And my interpretation of separate would be separate from anything other than that. And therefore, it would be its own warrant article. You're advocating that it be one. I think we've already gone on record as saying it would be two.
We're talking about the ballot question and not the articles.
The ballot question and the warrant articles are two different things. I think that there might be a little confusion.
Yep, so let's
right
clarify
now.
that.
Yeah.
Right.
So when we sent the letter and said it would be a separate warrant article, it will go on the town meeting warrant as a separate item from the town budget, as it typically does. When we're talking about the ballot, that would be a separate item, and we don't need to make sure that that mirrors the town meeting warrant. Does that make sense?
So you're making mention there'd be two warrant articles, but it would morph into one ballot question.
Correct.
And
Which
you
is
don't think,
done commonly in other
do you,
towns.
do you think that's confusing to people? Or could it potentially be confusing?
So I think it could potentially be confusing, but I can also tell you in multiple conversations with the superintendent, he understands the stress the school budget puts on towns, and he also is willing to be a partner, so he has no objection with it being one warrant article, or one
Ballot.
ballot question, thank
Right.
you.
I have a question, or clarification.
Could
The-
I ask you to identify yourself, who the speaker is?
Yeah, this is Ben.
Yep, thank you.
Sorry, no problem. The question I have, and and this is more of a clarification for me, the ballot question is more or less allowing us to find a funding source. It's not agreeing to any specific budget. It is the warrant article that the town votes on whether we support the 8.3 million for the school. So if I understand correctly, if we would, let's say we put a ballot question that says an override of 1.2 maximum. So we've now set a maximum borrowing limit, let's call it. But when we as a town go to vote, people will have a choice on whether they would like to vote for the $8 million school. They could say yay or nay. And would they like to vote for the 700K for the town, yay or nay? Regardless of what order those pass or not, if the override of the 1.2 passes, we have a funding source. And it could only be for 700K. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes.
Except for the end, that it could be for only 700K.
If, I think, I don't want to put words in Ben's mouth, but I think he means if that's all that's voted at town meeting. Because once it,
Right,
obviously you're not going to write a number in on the ballot question.
You have to say how much you're raising extra. on
Right.
The ballot question. So you need to put this number.
I have the learning from experience thing nibbling at me, and that is that $1.2 million is not that far away from $1.4 million, which is the first override that we went out, $1.440 million, and that was defeated. And then we pared it back to 950,000, and that was defeated. And this number is bigger than both of those.
Yeah.
I'm also reminded that we haven't always done it this way, because 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, we had an override for the school at only 300,000, but it passed. So part of my concern is making this number too large where it doesn't pass, and we haven't accomplished anything. And for the superintendent, not minding that it be one article, I would say, of course he would want to have it one article, because he wouldn't want the school to have to compete with an ambulance or a dump truck or public safety or public works. So it benefits him to say that. I don't blame him for doing that, but I don't know that's reason why we should do that, is my point. And everyone knows how I feel about him, which I have high regard, but I need to walk back a little bit in terms of why he may have said that. So that wasn't a convincing closing argument for me that he would work with us on that. I think, of course, he would want one. Because the need for public safety and public works could carry the school, so he may want that. I'm of the opinion that people should make separate choices. There are gonna be champions for each one of these, and it's our job to champion each one of these as well, and get the information out there as been talked about already. Again, I don't know it's our place to vote, but my personal opinion, I like separating rather than bundling them to one, because I fear it's gonna be too big a number.
The difference between this year and last year is this year, the school is going to an override, whereas last year, the school didn't go to an override at all. The school was excluded from the override and simply voted at town meeting. Where the school would be included in an override, as you mentioned a minute ago, the last, that small override that we had for the school in 2018 passed. If we have any chance of getting an override to pass this year, it's probably going to be because the school is included.
Probably gonna be why?
Because the school is included in it.
So the numbers, so last year, so the first override we did was on May 13th, right? It was for 1.4. It was 274 in favor, 488 against. The second override we did was on June 24th for 950. It was 457 in favor, 538 against. So it was a much closer margin on the second one than it was the first. When we did the two overrides, we did one for the school for $300,000 for Wachusett Regional Assessments, and we did one for $100,000 for the operating budget on May 14th, 2018. They both were wins. The school was a 200 in favor, 172 in opposition, and the general operating one that was a couple $100,000 less was 219 in favor, 151 against. So there's been other ones, if you look back to the Wachusett Regional High School assessment for $60,000 in 1989, I know a long time ago, but it was 565 in favor, 499 against. Taxes for the shortfall for the school budget in 92 was 601 in favor, 416 against. So we don't have a lot of numbers on those. And to your point, Mark, you know, some of the school ones have failed in the past, right? So we had override in 2014 that lost 2-1, 67 to 175 for 120,000 for the school. Another one that lost 88 to 214 for 400,000 in 2015. A 2016 one for 300,000 and a 2017. The problem, though, that it comes down to is if you put those amounts in two pieces and they're not both successful, it's a cut to the town. So even if the notion is to put to people, do you want to support the school budget, do you want to support the town, or would you like to support both? Anything other than a yes to both is a cut to the town, because even if we were to send the budget back at town meeting with another town to the school district, it is very unrealistic to believe that they're gonna cut our assessment by $411,000, right? When we've sent it back in the past, they've sent, you know, we've got lucky, maybe $25,000 is the cut. I think $411,000 is highly unrealistic.
Right now,
But the problem is, we are at the point with the town's budget where we can't afford to cut any more than we've already been cutting, and
right.
we can't sustain it. We just can't. Every time, just the notion of the potential uncertainty of the budget is enough that people are leaving. Last year, we saw a lot of people leave, and ironically enough, they weren't even people that would have lost their position with any of the cuts that happened.
I agree with you. But my fear, like, so for me looking at this personally, I'm looking at this and saying, Finance Committee and all of these department heads did an amazing job this year, keeping it under 2.5%. If they had to go over, they went over by the minimum they had to. We know our town budget is tight. It's good. If you lump these together, my opinion, I don't think that the Wachusett budget and the town budget should be together, because then you're gonna lose them both. Okay, I think that I mean, if we feel that 7.99% is the best that Wachusett can do, I think we really need to take a look in the mirror. Because I can tell you that this town budget is the best that we can do, because these department heads and you and us, we all sat here and hammered this out, and it was very well done. It's tight, but I think it's good. I get concerned that if you're gonna put them together, if the appetite isn't there for Wachusett, that they both fail. And now we're looking at, we absolutely don't wanna have what happened last year. We do not wanna cut services, we don't wanna cut staff. That we cannot afford to do. That's just my concern.
I think, to reiterate Julia's point, I think the difference is, though, last year the school wasn't on the table, right?
But this year it is.
This year it is.
And we
but
have the ability to
that-
keep them separate.
But that brings out people from the school to vote. Traditionally speaking, that brings out people from the school to vote. And if you separate them, you run the risk, and I think it's a real high risk, that just the school budget gets voted in and not the town budget. And if that happens, again, that's a large cut to the town services that has to be looked at.
Part of what doesn't work in our favor is that the override for the school is likely to be the smaller number that's in front of people on a ballot if you have two questions. And so it's more likely that that's going to pass than the larger number. For those who may be undecided going in, and they want to support something, well, there's going to be smaller numbers there for them to support.
Yeah, I almost always, actually not almost, I always lean towards separating them. Especially if we're reversing the order of the meeting, I have less, it freaks me out less this year with the order of the meeting reversed. If you're going to the ballot first. I don't know, I think you can overthink it in many different directions. It's a really tough year. I don't know that there's, normally I'm really 100% against putting them together. I'm kind of on the fence this time, and especially, I just don't know. It's a weird year, but I'm not opposed to having them lumped together, especially with the ballot first, because you have such a limited number of people that show up at the town meeting, and it goes to your point. If the school's on, you can only put so many people in the room, and you tend to not get a pretty even crowd between the two of them. I think with the ballot, you have the opportunity, at least for both sides, to show up. I don't know if it gets skewed in one direction or the other, if you're going to the ballot first. So I don't know if that was even helpful, because ultimately I'm kind of, I guess the difference is usually I'm pretty hardcore about keeping them separate. I don't have as much hesitation about it, the way this year's playing out, of combining them. It just doesn't make me as nervous as it normally would.
So Julia, what actually are you looking for from us? We've shared some discussion. It doesn't appear that this is, again, something that we formally vote on. It looks like it's in your court. Have we given you good feedback information for the select board to make their own determination?
I'm not sure if we've heard from everybody on finance. I'd like to hear everybody's opinion.
Yeah, we have not.
This is Ben. I'll share. I think, one of the benefits of doing the town meeting after, benefits and I guess detractors if we separate them, is that if we do it after and 4 towns have voted already, the school budget vote doesn't matter anymore. Because if 4 towns have already agreed and we separated it, then it's kind of people that would be possibly interested in supporting the town or supporting the school. We're locked into that 400K. And one of the benefits would be is that if they were one, and again, this is a struggle. I have a struggle with this as well, but it's if there were one, and the ballot question was already approved at the higher level, then the town has two options. One is to decline the one number, because at the end of the day, it really is the 700K from the town. And we go back and try to figure out how to reduce that to some other number. Or they can support a single number and, we have one town meeting and one ballot. So I think there was a lot of struggling, and I think one reason that I might be more inclined to combine them this year is because we will know where the school vote is by the time this meeting happens.
Right.
Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit here. It's Jeff. Honestly, neither answer is a great answer. It's a $1.1 million deficit, no matter how you split it. I'm okay. I'm comfortable with the one, combining them. I mean, normally under normal circumstances, I would kind of like to see it separated, because they are separate items. One budget, meaning the town budget, is completely within our jurisdiction. One is not. But I think in this case, I think like both Ben and Tony have articulated, I'm okay with one. Neither is a good answer. It's $1.1 million, no matter how you slice it. And it's going to have a tough time passing, just to be honest, not to be negative, no matter how you split it. But maybe for ease of use, I'm okay with one.
And this
Yeah,
is
neither
Tim.
is a good option. Thanks.
This is Tim. I'm in favor of one number. Just a lot of great context, Julia, and certainly Ben, Jeff, and Tony. I think the one number really simplifies it. And I think there was a lot of confusion, and like what Heather suggested in terms of, the votes and the meetings, and I think there was a lot of good thought put into it. So I'm in favor of one.
Great.
We've heard from all six.
Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate that.
Good.
All right. Is there any further discussion on this issue from the select board side?
I just
I
want to
think
say.
it's a really,
Go on,
I think it's a
Kirk.
really valid point that, since we've pushed our town meeting out, we'll kind of already know before we get there. And so I support the one override number. We're combining them.
And I agree with the one number and the result that we'll already know. But it's going to be a tough sell for that amount, but I want to just say that this is all going to be budget related. Last year we were going out for a little bit extra to, not to pad it, but to help other sources. This is solely for budget purposes, and if this override fails, then the town's got to expect that we're going to be cutting on the town side by over 700,000, maybe more. And the reason I think the town side is a little bit higher this year than the schools is because we cut so much last year and didn't restore. So we're not playing catch up, but we're just trying to put in what we need, knowing that it's not a wish list, it's what the town needs to operate. And there's no extra in there.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. I think, the one number makes sense this year. I fully understand and appreciate wanting to split the two numbers out for transparency purposes, but the good news this year is the way that the budget was set up and the way we went into it in the fall when we had our joint working session is it made it easy for us to determine what the split is, which makes this decision a lot easier to make. So that's super helpful. We have Heather to thank for setting it up that way and helping us out in that process. So I'm supportive of the one number. I think you heard from me already. One thing we'll have to talk about, I think, next, and we'll take a motion, but is with town meeting moved, is there something more that we can do? What's the process going to be to get the word out? Because we won't have town meeting to build momentum up to the ballot vote, which we normally would have. And although you can say that, you know, there's a lot of different people that show up to the ballot that maybe aren't coming to town meetings, so wouldn't benefit from town meeting happening beforehand. I think there's still some valid reason to have a informational session or something to that effect beforehand, and perhaps, you know, as Heather mentioned, we do that on the night that we would have originally had town meeting. So just a thought, but I'll let you think about that while we take a motion for the override amount. So is there a motion from the select board for a ballot question related to an override for the town's budget?
So moved.
What's the amount, Kirk? Is
I
it?
can't see the screen.
Oh,
Are we going for, are we
Oh,
rounding?
one,
Okay,
one, one.
1130.
Yeah,
1129968.
so 1130,
You can round up if
it makes more
we
sense,
want
I
it for
think.
$42.
Just to be it's a whole $42, yeah, just to make it a round number.
It's gonna mess up my calculations per the average home by a few pennies.
So it would be $1,130,000, Kirk.
Okay, thank you.
So you accept that as a friendly amendment?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, great. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, Kirk?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. So do we want to talk about how we, you know, work on trying to get information to the town? I think, you know, obviously last year we had like multiple information sessions. You know, it was difficult to get people to come to those information sessions. And so learning from last year, which seems to be the theme, learning from last year, it's probably better to just have one. Do it at a time when people maybe already have their calendars marked, which, you know, if we just moved the town meeting, and so perhaps that night is the best night to do it. And then we do it at Paxton Center School, which is where we tend to have these types of meetings. And I'm hoping that maybe we can have, you know, a member of finance and a member of the select board and Heather work all together to try and create a brief but informative presentation that would focus on why we are here in this place where we are, not on the negative, what's going to be cut. So, because I don't want people to think that this is scare tactics. That's not, you know, obviously that that process was received in that way, and we don't want that, right? So I think it's more informative to people for them to understand why is it that we have such a big deficit? What is contributing to those numbers? And we can talk about inflation, where, you know, the economy has had an inflation factor of like 20% over the last 3 years, but our town budget has only gone up 10% over that same period of time. We can talk about the Chapter 70 issue with the state and the funding formula for the school. We can talk about, you know, decreases in our town revenue, so that, you know, it's clear that where this deficit is coming from, and that it's not just, you know, the last couple of years. This has been building for a very long time, and here we are, we're at the cliff. So, you know, this is information that if we can simplify it, put it in bite-sized pieces that, you know, a regular homeowner is going to understand, I think that's going to help us, if for no other reason than they understand the process better.
But are there information sessions for zoning and MBTA? Like, I think, would it make sense to combine that so people aren't trying to go? The odds of getting people to one, and I think the MBTA thing, people really need to.
You don't think it'd be too much TMI?
I'm just worried, for me, the MBTA thing really needs to get out there, because I don't think people realize that implications to, like, voting that down, you know, we're gonna have this battle between the I don't want it in my backyard
Yep.
and the it's not like the zoning, you know, so I think that's just as important as this. So yes, Jeremy, to your point, it is way too much information.
I was being like, if you hadn't tried to do it in one.
It is true. I'm just worried
But
about
Tony,
like.
the
yeah.
MBTA is not on the,
No, I know. I just think we want to get ahead of that though and
not on the
start.
town meeting. I think we need,
Can we add that into these information sessions so that we're getting way, way, way ahead of that too? Because I'm really worried about that.
Can I get a point of, isn't that being pushed off?
It
that's
is.
what I just said. It's not
Yeah.
this town meeting.
Right.
It's a special town meeting in the fall.
We
Yeah.
gotta wait to hear back from EOHLC once we send it in as to what their comments are to make final changes or make any of their suggested changes. And then, Tony, to your point, we'll turn it to the public and try to get some info sessions out there
Okay.
and,
So if
Some
these, all
public
I'd say is,
feedback
yeah, if these are still
opportunities.
going on in the point where we're ready to talk about that,
yep,
maybe combine the two.
yep.
So,
So-
not out of the gate.
But I think just focusing on the budget stuff, I think Jeff's been trying to speak for a few seconds.
That's okay, go ahead.
The
All
only,
right, thanks. I was just gonna say, I think you're all right. And I think whatever we present needs to be lean and crisp. You know, it's 5 to 7, 8 slides, kind of how you would present, at a high level. And some things that need to be in there is, I think, what we've heard, how we got there, or how we got here. What are the drivers for that? Loss of town revenue, dramatic drop off of Chapter 78, inflation. So I think it's really a simple slideshow, 5 to 7 slides. Here's where we are. Here's how we got here. Here are the drivers that got us here. I think there also needs to be in that presentation, whether it's a pie chart or a list of our $16 million budget and what percentage of that budget is going to each department in general. I mean, at least the big numbers. I think people need to see that. They need to see where their tax money is going. That way it's clear, it's crisp, there's no confusion. And I also think there needs to be a conversation, and it's a tough conversation, but one that people need to hear, that this is going to get worse before it gets better in the next few years, and why that is. And maybe that's some of the projections that Heather has done and some of that work. But I think it's really about a kind of a crisp slideshow, very compact. This is how we got here. These are the percentages of your budget. There's no fork in here. Any outside of guidance things are really to keep status quo. They're not additional items, and there are, so I think that's the best way to do it. Thank you.
so the only other thing I was gonna add, Lori brought this up earlier, is while it's probably a good idea to do a very large information session still on the date we had scheduled for town meeting, we also want to keep in mind that a lot of people are requesting, and they've already put in their request for vote by mail ballots. And those will go out, we order ballots next week, right after the ballot questions go into Lori on Monday. So they'll have them by mid-April, the first set of the vote by mail ballots. So we need to find a way to make sure we're reaching that audience as well. And whether that's a short presentation at the next select board meeting on the 14th, where we spend 30 minutes and kind of preview a little bit of that 5 to 8 slide piece that Jeff's talking about, whether it's, just getting information on the website or just doing an email blast to let people know it's coming up and how to get more information and so forth. We need to find a way to make sure we're reaching those voters as well.
Well, see, right, so you didn't do mailings this year for the vote by mail, right? So there was no state election. So the avenue for that was just an email blast and the website.
I think Lori did an email blast on the
And she
website,
got a-
and then
she-
she started getting a lot of
She got
flurries in.
a lot of, right? So I think that works, for sure. I mean, take that as I saw it, right? I mean, well, not that I don't see anything on the website, but I think people really see that. So it's a start, right? At least getting that word out there.
Yep.
So just like warrant articles are not our lane, we don't write them. I would clearly go on record, I've never seen a ballot question written that I've liked. So I think a lot of care needs to go into how that's crafted, because it could be worded in such a way that it doesn't gain any support, just because of the restrictions of what we can't say. And when we're restricted with what we can't say, some people feel that there's information being withheld. So I think there's got to be a fine balance. Again, not our hunt, but for whatever it may be worth. I'd share that advice that that's got to be crafted very carefully.
So,
And that's very restrictive because all we can put in is the purpose
and the
and the
amount.
amount. The amount, that's it.
Yeah.
We can't say
Yeah.
what the outcome will be if it doesn't pass. We can't say how much percentage increase or anything like that. It's just clearly the tax impact of the amount, the amount and the purposes. Simple
No,
as that.
you make a good point, and my point is that it's not a position paper or a marketing collateral piece, but
Right.
but to the extent that we can get something in there that's more helpful than just
Yeah.
So I-
restricted.
I think that's well said. It's not an advocacy piece. It's really just a statement of the budget and where things are and the breakdown of the budget and the deficit. It's again, not an advocacy piece. It's like Dragnet, just the facts, man. That's all it is. And the facts are, this is the deficit, this is how your budget's broken down, these are the drivers, and then it's up to the voters to make a decision.
And we can definitely, to Jeremy's point with using the email alerts and so forth in the website, we can most definitely put the question and then explain what it actually means, to Mark's point. So it may not be on the question itself, but we can definitely do it. We're usually very cautious with how we write things on these, and often we'll send any of our supplemental materials explaining things out to legal, just because we have to walk a fine line to make sure that we're not violating any laws, campaign political finance, or even conflict of interest, as far as what we can say.
Plus your budget,
One question.
your FY '26 budget tab on the website has a ton, almost everything, right?
Yes.
So that's people,
Yes,
that's
and it-
already up.
It
That's
already has
active and
this
live.
packet on it
Got
and the
everything
website
on
for
it, right? So
tonight.
that's a good
Yep.
tool that people can click on as well.
Yes.
One question I have is that in the ballot question, is there any way to say that this is a maximum and not what will be drawn? I don't know if that violates anything, but I think what people need to understand is we're asking for a maximum amount. Not, if they vote on the ballot to approve it, that doesn't mean that they're approving all the budgets.
I think what we can probably say, again, walking it through legal to make sure we're okay, I think we can probably say on our explanation sheet or what have you, that, even if this passes at the ballot, it still has to pass town meeting. And that's voted in separate articles, one for the town and one for the school. So they have a second chance to vote how it actually gets split and appropriated.
I was thinking 2 words saying up to.
I don't think we can use that in the ballot
it-
question. I think it has to be definitive of what the numbers. I understand your point. Unfortunately, to Carol and Julia's point, the state hands us the question and says, this is your question. Please fill in the blanks, the number and the purpose. And that's about
Okay,
it.
okay. Yeah, I missed that
So
part.
Julia's got the word in.
Yeah, so the way it has to be written is based on General Law, Chapter 59, so Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section 21C, Part G. And the wording is, shall the city or town of Paxton be allowed to assess an additional $1.13 million in real estate and personal property taxes for the purposes of, and then we have to state the purpose, which would be offsetting or defraying the usual and customary costs of the budget, for which the monies from this assessment will be used for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2025.
Six.
So,
Six.
oh, I'm sorry,
Six.
2026.
6.
Thank you.
So it is kind of set in stone how the ballot question has to be written, but that doesn't mean we can't provide additional explanation for it. And I think that's a valid consideration and something we should take into account.
And I didn't mean to say tax impact, I meant the additional money that we were raising. Because I can't even say that in the question.
Right. So so in the terms of creating a slide deck, as Jeff mentioned, to really simplify and drill down the information and just make it easy for somebody to consume, is there anybody who would be perhaps willing to start that process and take it on volunteer to start working on that?
I'd be happy to do that.
I would recommend the fire department.
I second that, Mark.
They're going like this.
You're too long.
I second.
Too much detail.
But we'll have a nice binder on it, though.
Would that?
Still haven't got through their last presentation. It's right over here, though.
I think between Heather and Julia and Jeff just volunteered, I think that's a good team right there.
All right. I'm happy to work on it with Jeff and Heather and hopefully come up with something that's, easy for people to understand and clear and gets the point across. So. And then I think, to Heather's point, we need to think about, the people that are getting a mail-in ballot that might not be, that might be voting before that night. How do we do that? And so perhaps we can put something together if that presentation is ready for one of the next 2 select board meetings, then we could certainly put it on then, and maybe we could even push it out as a PDF. All right.
So now that we've dealt with the override question, the only clarification I need from SB is just the specific language you want for the purpose of the override. Are we going with one of the ones you read, Julia, where it's defraying the usual and customary costs of town and school budgets, or do we want to just say for the town and school operating budgets? What language do we want to attach that's the easiest for people to understand?
Yeah.
I think just the town and the school operating budgets.
Okay.
I don't think we need to say defray the cost. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that we say that, the
We usually,
warrant.
yeah, and it actually wasn't even written on the thing I was reading. I was just remembering what we usually say.
That's what we always say. That's what we say at town
Yep,
meeting, but
yep.
yeah.
So the purposes of, do you want to use the word defraying or covering?
Covering is probably more easily understood.
Kirk, you heard all that?
I did.
You're okay with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Carol, you're okay with that?
Yeah, to assess the additional amount. It's for the purpose of.
Covering the town and school operating budgets for FY '26.
And it's going to have to get reviewed by Brian, by legal anyways, so
Yes.
he'll correct us if he thinks that we've written something
I don't even think we
wrong
need covering. I think just operating the school and the town.
for the cost of operating
Yeah,
the
yeah.
school in the town.
So all 3 of you are okay if I work with Brian on that lingo?
I'm okay with that.
Kirk, you're
Yes,
okay?
ma'am.
To get to
Yes, ma'am.
the town clerk
All right.
by
So
Monday.
So that's the
Yeah.
operating override budget. And now there's still the matter of the capital improvement committee's
Yep.
report relative to the 3 items submitted for suggested funding through, hold on, I'll get the words. Override ballot questions.
So I had a conversation with Travis earlier today about the amounts for the possible DPW trucks. He's willing to take that off the table for the time being. So
Which one is he looking?
for that $200,000 number for the DPW, for the dump trucks, he's willing to take that off the table for the time being. And we can always come back to that at a later point, special town meeting or what have you. But we don't have to vote on that one tonight if he's willing to withdraw it.
And then you have school boilers and the 2 police cruisers for 3 years.
Yeah.
So can I just interject, being a member of CIPC, I'm more than happy to discuss it, but I'm questioning whether or not this should be discussed at a finance committee meeting right now.
So they just need to finalize the warrant article, or I'm sorry, now I'm doing it. The
Ballot
ballot questions, because
questions.
they all have to go Monday to Lori.
We have to finalize the ballot questions tonight.
So it should only be another moment or two, Mark, that we commandeer your meeting. So then we have the school boilers for $67,600 that was recommended funding through a
Capital
capital
exclusion.
exclusion and the police cruisers.
Yeah. Which
Well,
would,
we said depreciation for this, the police cruisers. Didn't we say 1 year depreciation and the 2 following years out of raise and appropriate?
that's not how it's included in the report of the capital.
But the capital report is only a suggestion of funding. We don't have
Yeah.
to go with that funding.
Right.
We have no authority, we were just making a recommendation.
It's just a recommendation.
Okay.
It's not set in stone. The other things are, we can't change anything. So,
Yep.
so we're down to, we got the boiler, 67,600,
Yep.
and that was the only thing that we was going to put on capital exclusion.
Right. And so the cruisers, CIPC recommended a capital exclusion for that.
Yeah.
And what's your thought on that?
I would recommend, which, as I did before, that we go to the capital depreciation for the first year, and then the 2 following years out of raise and appropriate like we've always done.
Yeah. Now, if we're taking the first year out of capital and they didn't vote to approve that, is that,
It's, like I say, it's the town that votes on the funds.
We have no say.
We recommend
Okay.
it, but
All
the
right.
town votes on it.
okay.
We might
So-
have an opinion, but we have no say.
So the only other thing then would be the boilers. Now, it's a very small amount. I know Heather was concerned that it wouldn't pass, and then we'd be without boilers.
Yep.
And I understand that feeling. Do we, now that we've lost the 220,000 for the debt exclusion, or capital exclusion, do we want to try and deal with that elsewhere? I can only think of the depreciation, but we haven't got enough in there.
Right. If, so right now, what are we looking at for a leftover amount in capital depreciation?
Nothing, because there's 5,000 for the library.
Yeah,
There was the DPW, 12,500. The police department's first year cruiser.
which would be 40.
Is it down to 59,000?
Sorry?
Is it down now to 59,000? Capital depreciation?
Oh, we're trying to figure that out right now, what the number is. So 5,000 library, 12,500 for the DPW lift. And then we were talking, if you did the first year of the cruiser
Right.
lease, that would be, Mark's not
I
here,
think it's
I thought it said
59,000.
45.
45.
I thought it said 45.
I think we had it down as 30,000 each year, but perhaps that's not correct. I thought it was 30 and then outfitting and,
Yes, it's
So far.
30,000, not 45,000.
It's 30,000 each year.
Right, it said 30 was.
It's a much better number. And that's for the 2. Okay, 30,000 per year for 3 years. So
Have
then,
you got the 12,500?
yeah, I did the,
So could we get rid of the 12,500 and try and find that in a transfer? In the year transfer?
find it in an end of year transfer as of May 1st.
Heather,
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the
could
first
we do
part.
an end of year transfer after May 1st for 12,500? I know this.
Are we talking about the lift?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think we could probably find
the health
internally
insurance?
the funds for that.
Okay,
yeah.
so take that one off.
okay.
So all we've got is 5,000 plus
30,
30 plus 67,600. Is that right, Mark?
102,600.
And we've got 106 in there.
6, 12, yep, 102,600. And there's 106 in there.
That's it, deplete it and get rid of those.
You could do that.
And then we've only got one item on the
Then there's
ballot.
just one on the ballot, and we don't have to worry about anything competing.
Okay. Kirk, did you get all that? So after all the math, I think the discussion between Julia and Carol as they were going through the pieces is to pull things from the capital depreciation fund to avoid having to go out for another ballot question to compete with the operating. So school boilers and the first year of the cruiser would both come from the capital depreciation fund. DPW vehicles would be off the table per Travis for this year. The lift would come from a line item transfer, once we hit May 1st. Did I miss any pieces?
Nope.
Is that all of
I
them?
think that's it.
Okay.
That's, that looks right by my math.
Okay. So then we only have the one override question for the ballot, and that's it.
Right.
We've taken care of everybody's, the capitals,
Not to throw a wrench in the future of 5 from the library.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
That includes the 5, yeah.
Five,
Did I
Oh,
hear you
in the
say
library.
2 boilers?
no, one.
One boiler.
One,
one.
just one.
Just
Thank
one.
you.
Because,
Unless we could get 2 for the price of 67.5.
Buy one, get one free?
There you go. You're in for that, right?
I am.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Mark. I think we're all set on that.
so we don't
as
need to
far
do
as-
any voting on,
So then we
Yep.
don't need any more ballots. Sorry, I'm doing it now
Nope,
too.
we're all
Any more
set.
Ballot questions.
Yep.
okay.
Back to you.
So I don't have any further business on the finance committee side. Is there any old business, new business? None? Anyone from the public? Hearing none? The finance committee, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? None. All in favor, Tony?
Yes.
Jeremy?
Yes.
Ben?
He dropped off at 8:10.
Jeff?
Aye.
Tim?
Yes.
Mark votes aye. We stand adjourned.
All right, I'll accept a motion to adjourn for the select board.
So moved.
Second,
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, Kirk?
Aye.
Carol?
aye.
And I'll vote aye. We are also adjourned.
What we failed to do is to thank the finance committee for all the hard work
Yes,
and the departments.
Absolutely.
thank you. It's a huge point. They went through the budget with a fine tooth comb. We can feel very confident in the numbers that are in front of us. They have gone through everything, and they have approved the numbers that we have now, and I appreciate all of that hard work. It doesn't come easy.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Conveniently
much,
after your
guys.
meeting was over, though.
Our pleasure.
We're still on there, don't worry.
We are sorry we fell 1,000,003 short, but thank you.
Have to do better next year.
I know.
Thank
Do what we
you.
can.
Thank
Thank you.
Good night.